Greetings, Great28 Facilitators. So we begin our third season of these Great28 small groups as we gather around God's Word with fellow believers. And I pray that you have been blessed, not only personally, but that your group has been blessed by spending this time together in God's Word. So, the next series is going to be on the Ten Commandments, okay? And I'm hoping for a lot out of this season. I'm really hoping that we would begin to see the Ten Commandments in a new way, that way being more of a light for our path, and to begin to see the law as good. Even when it convicts us of our sin, it's still good. What's bad is our sin and our propensity to want to transgress God's law. But I'm hoping that you will begin to love the commandments, love how they provide you the perfect will of God for all the vocations that God has given you in your life. And so I'm also not going to go into great amount of detail on the lessons. I think they're pretty self-explanatory, but I will highlight them all. So this video is going to cover lessons 1 through 3. So obviously we begin and open with the first commandment, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at Exodus chapter 20 verses 1 through 3 in this study, highlighting verse 3, which is actually the first commandment. Now, one of the important things we look at in this study is also recognizing that God identifies himself first before giving the commandments. And he identifies himself as the God who saves and delivers his people out of Egypt. And so it's the greatest exodus in the Old Testament. And God reminds them that he's a God that cares for them, takes care of them, and delivers them, and saves them, and protects them. And he shares all of those positive characteristics of himself prior to giving his people in writing the commandments of how they ought to live toward him and toward others. And so in the discover part, there will be just a couple questions, and here in this one it is, if you had to choose a color, white or black, to describe the function and role of the Ten Commandments, which would you choose and why? And so hopefully this will give some good insight into whether people see the commandments more of a light and a guide for their life, or more of something that is kind of like the nurse that slaps the wrist, or the nun that slaps the wrist, okay? And so we're kind of trying to flush out how people see the role and function there. Then there's some true and false questions, which I think will be helpful in understanding God as the giver of all things. Even those things we place great value in, we have to kind of go back to the source of those things that we value and get that clear. Then there's a story to look at, an extended story. These are usually pulled from the small catechism, where the catechism provides an extended look at that commandment in real life. And so you'll have that. And then the per section and the note section. So pretty self-explanatory. Second commandment will be pretty easy also. And the reading now will be, I just noticed a typo here, will actually be Exodus 21 through 7. And that will include the second commandment, verse 7. Now, other denominations use verses 4 through 5 as the second commandment. We look at that as an expansion of the first commandment and included in the first commandment. And so the second commandment for us is in verse 7. What's significant about the name and how we use it? Looking at the Lord's name and not taking it in vain. In the Discover section, there will be some really straightforward questions. And in the Deepen section, which I forgot to mention on Lesson 1, in the Deepen section, there is a excerpt taken from the Large Catechism, which is from that Luther wrote, and the large catechism lessons on the commandments, each commandment is a sermon that Luther delivers. And so I just take a section of the large catechism and ask some questions surrounding that help us begin to kind of flesh that out a little bit. Okay. And so in the second commandment, we have in the deliver section a few different passages to look up that will hopefully serve as a way by which we can use God's name in a good way, and maybe a way that we weren't aware of before. Okay? Lesson 3, we have the third commandment, which you are going to see and discover, of course. It's not a literal keeping of the commandment as it was in the days of Israel, but we still follow the commandment just in a slightly different way. So the points of emphasis in this lesson are really going to be the importance of rest in the life of an individual, and how God gifts to us rest for a very specific purpose in this world, and to renew us and to refresh us. And then secondly, it will lead us to think about, are we gladly hearing and learning God's Word and putting ourselves in places like a Great 28 group to be fed God's Word? And where do we go to find Jesus? Where does he locate himself? And according to the Scriptures, we know that he locates himself in his Word, among his people, and in the sacraments. And so we're going to challenge people to be intentional about finding rest, especially in a world that says achieve, 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 and if you're not working 100 hours, you're really not that significant, and all sorts of reasons. So I do want you to kind of get behind what's going on in a person that would prevent them from taking rest. And I think what you're going to find is something sinful. Whether it's selfishness, pride, greed, whatever it is, I think it'll be sinful if you can't find time to take rest. There's something motivating the reason why you can't, and I want that to kind of come out, hopefully, in a healthy way. And lastly, just the importance of challenging yourself to be regular in attendance at church, regular in attendance in small groups, regular in attendance at Bible studies, not just because in those places God intends to feed you, which is certainly reason alone that could be enough, but the other reason is because other people need you and your interaction and your experience and the things that you have learned as it relates to God's Word. So it's not all about you. It's also about those that you gather with and engage who are blessed by you. Okay? So I hope this is a great beginning to the series, and we'll get to the second table next. First table is the first 3 commandments. Second table is the last 7 commandments. Have a good day.